mafiaromancestory. Diane searched Aladino's eyes for lies. Found only sincerity. Resolve. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from, and if you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe. I've got a lot more coming. And I hope she hasn't seen me in over a year. For the first time since their breakup, she allowed herself to hope. 1 month passed. Aladino kept his promise. Day by day he handed operations to Marcus. Secret meetings grew less frequent. Midnight calls disappeared. Marcus carried the empire while Aladino became someone different. He woke at 5 a.m. to prepare bottles. I worked from home, keeping the door open to hear the babies. I learned to cook, burning 3 pans in the process. But he didn't quit. Diane watched it all. Little by little her wall cracked. She allowed him to stay overnight. First just the sofa, but it was a step forward. One night near month's end, Aladino found Diane reading on the sofa. "Come with me. Just 15 minutes. She followed him to the penthouse rooftop. The place where he'd proposed 2 years earlier. Her heart stopped when she saw him drop to one knee. But he didn't pull out a ring. Instead, a wrinkled sheet of paper. Oliver's crayon drawing from daycare. 4 stick figures holding hands. Mama. Emma. Ollie. Daddy. "First time I proposed," Aladino said, voice shaking. "I gave you everything I had. Penthouse. Black card. Safety. But I couldn't give you what you actually wanted. I was so certain family was weakness. I was wrong. Loving you, loving the babies isn't weakness. It's the only thing that's ever made me strong. I don't deserve a second chance. But I'm not asking for myself. I'm asking for the babies. For Oliver, who finally stopped shrinking away. For Emma, who says, 'Dad,' before anything else when she wakes up." He lifted the drawing. "I'm asking because 4 stick figures holding hands are worth more than every empire I ever built." Tears slid down Diane's cheeks. "What about danger? Your enemies? I want to be a man my children can be proud of when they're old enough to understand. The man you always believed I could become." Diane looked at him kneeling under Seattle's night sky. Not with a diamond ring, but with their son's drawing. This wasn't the Aladino from 2 years ago. This was a man who'd been broken and rebuilt himself. She bent down, took his hand, pulled him to his feet. Her hands cupped his face. "Yes," she said, voice cracked with tears and a smile. "But this time we do it together. No more secrets. No more running. And if you ever leave again, I swear on the babies' lives, I won't." They stood forehead to forehead, breath mingling, city glittering beneath them. 2 people who once thought they wanted different things, now realizing they wanted the same thing. Each other. The red light returns 2 years later. Aladino sat at another red light. But everything was different. In the back seat, Oliver and Emma, now almost 3 years old, singing an off-key song from daycare. Beside him, Diane, hand resting on his arm, smiling at the chaos. He no longer drove a luxury car meant to intimidate. He drove a safe SUV with car seats and scattered Cheerios. When the light turned green, he didn't immediately accelerate. He paused, looked both ways, took his time. Because he'd learned, some things matter more than getting somewhere fast. He'd learned, a red light isn't just an inconvenience. Sometimes it's a moment of grace. A chance to see what you almost missed. A chance to change everything. As they drove toward home, a suburban house with a green yard and children's laughter echoing from every room, Diane squeezed his hand. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking about a red light. 2 years ago." "What about it?" Aladino glanced in the rearview mirror at his children, then at his wife. "I'm thinking that it's the best thing that ever happened to me. Something was very, very wrong." Isabella backed away slowly, her heart hammering so hard she was sure Julia could hear it. 184 days. That's how long Papa had been gone, each one marked on her calendar with purple markers. He called every night, his voice tired but warm, asking about school, about her drawings, about whether she was being brave like he taught her. Just 10 more days until he came home. Just 10 more days until she felt safe again. But Julia was doing something Papa wouldn't like. Isabella knew it the way she knew when a thunderstorm was coming, the way she knew when someone was lying. It felt wrong in her bones. Back in her room, Isabella's hands trembled as she reached into her jewelry box, past the plastic pearls and friendship bracelets, to the secret phone hidden beneath the velvet lining. Papa had given it to her the day he left for Europe, pressing it into her small hands with serious eyes. Only for emergencies, tesoro. Only if you're scared and can't reach Marco. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons, muscle memory guiding her through the numbers she'd memorized. The international ringtone seemed impossibly loud in the silence. What? Twice? Then? Isabella? Papa's voice cut through the static, sharp with immediate concern, and Isabella felt something break loose inside her chest. Papa, she whispered, pressing herself into the corner of her closet, surrounded by stuffed animals and the lingering scent of lavender from her mother's old sweater. Papa, she's stealing from you. The pretty lady. Julia. She's on your computer. She's taking your money. The pause on the other end stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight. Then Dante Romano's voice changed. Still gentle with his daughter, still her papa, but edged with something cold and dangerous that made Isabella's skin prickle. Where are you right now? In my room. In the closet. Good girl. Lock your door. Don't come out until I tell you. Not for anyone. Not even Marco. Do you understand? Papa, I'm scared. I know, tesoro. His voice softened, became the lullaby voice, the bedtime story voice. But you're the bravest girl I know. You just saved everything. I'm coming home. Stay hidden. I love you. The line went dead. Isabella sat in the darkness, clutching the phone to her chest like a talisman, and wondered if she'd done the right thing. Outside her locked door, footsteps passed, Julia's deliberate, measured pace. They paused outside Isabella's room. 1 second. 2. 3. Then continued down the hallway. Isabella pulled her knees to her chest and waited for her father. What neither Julia nor Isabella knew was that 6,000 miles away, Dante Romano was already moving. His private jet was being prepped. His most trusted enforcers, men whose loyalty had been forged in blood and proven through decades, were receiving encrypted messages that would bring them back to American soil within hours. The phone call that was meant to be an innocent child's warning had just triggered a war. The day Dante left for Europe, Isabella had clung to him in the mansion's marble foyer, her small arms wrapped around his neck like she could anchor him in place through sheer determination. He'd smelled like expensive cologne and the mint gum he always chewed before business meetings, and when he kissed her forehead, she'd felt the scratch of his 5 o'clock shadow against her skin. It's only for a little while, tesoro, he murmured, kneeling so they were eye to eye. Marco will take care of you. And Julia, she's kind, yes? She'll make sure you eat your vegetables and do your homework. Isabella had nodded, even though something in her 8-year-old heart had wanted to scream that she didn't need Julia, didn't need Marco, only needed him. But Papa had important business. Papa always had important business. And brave girls didn't cry when their fathers had to leave. In those first weeks, Julia had been perfect. Too perfect, though Isabella wouldn't understand that until much later. She'd appeared at the mansion within hours of Dante's departure, her arms full of coloring books and her smile bright enough to temporarily fill the papa-shaped hole in Isabella's chest. She'd learned Isabella's favorite foods, her bedtime routine, the specific way she liked her stuffed animals arranged on her bed. She'd been attentive without being suffocating, fun without being irresponsible. Marco had watched his wife's performance with pride and relief. "See, boss," he'd said during one of Dante's nightly calls. "I told you Julia would be great with the kid. Isabella loves her." And it had been true. Isabella had loved her, had trusted her, had started looking forward to Julia's visits, had started calling her Auntie Julia without anyone suggesting it. That was Julia's genius. She'd never pushed, never forced. She'd simply made herself indispensable, one hot chocolate and bedtime story at a time. But there had been moments, tiny fractures in the perfect facade, that Isabella's instincts had caught even when her conscious mind dismissed them. The way Julia's eyes would go flat when she thought no one was watching. The questions she'd ask about Papa's business, phrased like innocent curiosity but landing with a weight that felt wrong. The times Isabella had caught her in Papa's study, always with a reasonable explanation. Just watering his plants, sweetheart? Or, Marco asked me to grab a file. She'd allied with the Castellano family. Dante's Isabella had ignored those moments because Julia had been kind when Isabella was lonely. Because Julia had held her when she'd cried for her mother. The mother she'd never known, who existed only in photographs and Papa's careful stories. Because in the absence of her father, Julia had become the closest thing to family Isabella had. Which was exactly what Julia had counted on. By month 3, Julia had keys to every room. By month 4, she knew the household's routines better than the staff who'd worked there for years. By month 5, she'd earned Marco's complete trust and Dante's grateful confidence. And by month 6, she'd positioned herself perfectly to take everything. The conspiracy had been brilliant in its simplicity. Julia's real name was Sofia Torino, daughter of a mafia family that Dante had destroyed 15 years earlier. She'd spent over a decade planning, erasing her past, creating a new identity and positioning herself to marry Marco, Dante's most trusted associate. The man who had access to everything. The man who loved his wife so completely that he'd never question her. The man who, in his devotion, had become the perfect unwitting accomplice. Primary rivals, promising them access to his territories in exchange for support when she made her move. She'd cultivated relationships with corrupt officials, dirty cops, and mercenaries who'd be willing to eliminate problems when the time came. And she'd been patient, so devastatingly patient, knowing that empires weren't toppled in days but in months of careful groundwork. The only variable she hadn't accounted for was Isabella. The quiet, watchful little girl who saw more than adults gave her credit for. The brave, frightened child who loved her father more than she feared the consequences of speaking up. Dante Romano's private jet touched down at a private airfield outside the city 17 hours after Isabella's phone call. He deplaned into the pre-dawn darkness with 3 of his most trusted enforcers, Antonio, Vincent, and Carlo. These were men who'd been with him since the beginning, men whose loyalty had been tested in blood and fire, men who dropped everything on encrypted messages that said simply, Code Black. The girl. Come home. Antonio, a mountain of a man with scars that told stories of a violent life, checked his weapon as they climbed into the waiting SUV. What's the play, boss? Dante's voice was arctic. We extract Isabella first. Then we audit everything, every account, every transaction, every goddamn penny that's moved in the last 6 months. And we find out how deep this goes. Marco. Vincent asked carefully. Marco had been Dante's right hand for 20 years. Marco is either complicit or catastrophically blind. Dante's knuckles were white on the armrest. Either way, he's compromised. Isolation protocol until we know which. The drive to the Romano mansion took 30 minutes. Dante spent them staring out the window at the city he'd built his empire in, his mind running through scenarios and contingencies. If Julia had accessed his private computer, she had information that could dismantle everything. Account numbers, names of associates, details of operations that could bring federal attention they'd carefully avoided for decades. She had leverage. She had ammunition. And if she knew Isabella had called him, she had a motive to escalate. The thought of his daughter locked in her room, frightened and alone, made something violent and primal rise in Dante's chest. Isabella was the only pure thing in his life, the only reason he bothered building empires instead of burning them. And someone had threatened her. Had used his absence to get close to her. Had weaponized kindness to gain her trust while stealing everything he built. That was unforgivable. They approached the mansion from the service entrance, moving with the practiced silence of men who'd conducted extractions in hostile territory. The security system, Dante's own design, recognized his biometrics and disengaged without alerting the main house. They entered through the kitchen, and Dante felt his chest tighten at the familiar smell of the place. Oh. Except it had been invaded, contaminated by treachery. Antonio moved ahead, clearing rooms with hand signals that spoke of military training and decades of experience. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It was 5 a.m., that dead hour when even insomniacs and criminals usually slept. They found Marco in the study, Papa's study, slumped at the desk with a half-empty bottle of whiskey and documents scattered around him. He looked up as they entered, and Dante saw immediately that Marco hadn't been sleeping. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard, his hands shaking. "Dante," Marco breathed, rising unsteadily. "Thank God. I've been going through." He gestured helplessly at the papers. "I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. Where is she?" Dante's voice could have frozen lava. "Julia? She left 2 hours ago. Took the car, took bags. I confronted her about irregular transfers I'd noticed and she..." Marco's voice broke. "She laughed. Said I'd always been too stupid to see what was right in front of me. Said I'd served my purpose." "Not Julia," Dante snapped. "Isabella. Where is my daughter?" "Still in her room. She locked the door like you told her. She won't open it even for me." Marco's face crumpled. "Boss, I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. I vouched for her. I brought her into your home. Save it." Dante was already moving toward the stairs. "Antonio, secure Marco. No communication in or out until we sort this out." He took the stairs 3 at a time, decades of careful control dissolving with every step that brought him closer to his daughter. Isabella's door was locked, just as he'd instructed. He knocked gently, a rhythm they'd established years ago, their secret code. Silence. Then a small, trembling voice. "Papa? It's me, Tesoro. I'm home. You can open the door now." The lock clicked. The door opened a crack, and Dante's heart shattered at what he saw. Isabella stood there in her rumpled polka-dot pajamas, her face pale and exhausted, her eyes enormous with fear and relief. She'd been crying, her cheeks were stained with tears, and she was clutching a stuffed rabbit he'd won for her at a carnival years ago. "Papa," she whispered, and then she was in his arms, and Dante was holding her like she might disappear if he let go. "You're so brave," he murmured into her hair. "So brave, Tesoro. You did exactly right. You saved us." "Is she gone?" Isabella's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "The pretty lady? She's gone. And she's never coming back. I promise." Isabella pulled back to look at him, her small hands framing his face. "I liked her, Papa. She was nice to me. I wanted her to be good." And there it was, the loss of innocence Dante had tried so hard to delay. The understanding that kindness could be a mask, that trust could be weaponized, that people could smile while plotting harm. He saw it in his daughter's eyes, the death of a certain kind of childhood magic, and he wanted to resurrect Julia just so he could kill her again for stealing it. "I know, baby. I know. But sometimes people pretend to be nice when they're not. And what you did, recognizing that something was wrong even when you wanted to believe it wasn't, that took real courage." "Are you going to hurt her?" Isabella asked, and her voice was so small, so young. Dante could have lied. Could have given her a comforting fiction. But that was the old way, the way that had left her vulnerable to predators like Julia. So instead he chose the truth. "Yes," he said simply. "What she did isn't something I can forgive. But you don't have to think about that. That's adult business and you're still my little girl. Your job is just to be safe and loved. My job is to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." Isabella nodded slowly, processing this with the seriousness of someone twice her age. Then she said something that would stay with Dante for the rest of his life. "Next time you have to leave, can I come with you?" I don't want to be brave alone anymore. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in controlled demolition. Dante brought in forensic accountants, cybersecurity specialists, and investigators who owed him favors accumulated over decades. They tore through every transaction, every email, every digital footprint Julia had left in her 6-month operation. What they found was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its implications. Julia, Sofia Torino, had siphoned over $40 million into offshore accounts. She'd sold information about Dante's operations to the Castellano family, compromising 3 major smuggling routes and 2 legitimate business fronts. She'd identified weaknesses in security protocols and passed them to rival families. She'd corrupted 2 of Dante's associates with a combination of bribes and blackmail. But worse than the money, worse than the intelligence leaks, was the ultimate goal they uncovered in her encrypted communications. She'd been planning to have both Dante and Isabella killed within the next month. Make it look like a rival family's attack. Eliminate the Romano bloodline completely. Take over the remnants of the empire with Castellano backing and Marco as her unwitting puppet. The timeline had been accelerated by Isabella's phone call. When Julia had discovered the call, traced through phone records she'd been monitoring, she'd known her window was closing. That's when she'd run, taking what liquid assets she could and burning bridges behind her. Marco, when presented with the evidence, had broken completely. Dante watched dispassionately as his oldest friend wept, rage and grief and self-recrimination pouring out in equal measure. Marco had genuinely loved Sofia. Had been completely manipulated. Had seen warning signs and dismissed them because he'd wanted so desperately to believe in the fairy tale of late-in-life love. She studied me, Marco said hoarsely, staring at surveillance photos from before they'd met. For years. She knew exactly what I wanted. A partner, someone who appreciated the man behind the muscle. She became that person. And I was so fucking lonely, Dante. I was so ready to believe someone could love me. Dante felt no satisfaction in Marco's destruction, only a cold assessment of necessary consequences. You brought a viper into my daughter's life. Vouched for her. Gave her access. Your blindness nearly got Isabella killed. I know. Marco's voice was barely a whisper. I'd take a bullet for that kid. You know I would. But I put her in danger anyway. So do what you're going to do. I won't fight it. The old Dante might have ended it there, mercy through finality. But he had Isabella to think about now, and she'd asked him once why people in movies always chose revenge over kindness. So instead he chose exile. You have 24 hours to liquidate your assets and disappear, Dante said flatly. If I ever see you again, if you ever try to contact anyone from the organization, if you so much as breathe in Isabella's direction, I'll forget that you were once my brother. Understood. Marco nodded, relief and grief warring on his face. He'd live, but everything that made his life meaningful was over. As for the corrupted associates, the ones who'd taken Sofia's money and betrayed their oaths, those meetings were shorter and significantly less merciful. Dante delegated them to Antonio and moved on. There was no room for traitors in his organization. There never had been. Finding Sofia Torino took 6 days. She'd been careful, but panic had made her sloppy. She'd run to a Castellano safe house in Atlantic City, believing their alliance would protect her. She'd underestimated how quickly the Castellanos would reassess that alliance when Dante personally contacted their boss with evidence that Sofia had been skimming from their cut and planning to eventually betray them too. The Castellanos delivered her wrapped like a gift, their way of saying, no hard feelings, just business, let's not go to war over this woman. Dante had her brought to a neutral location, a warehouse on the docks that had seen too much blood over the years to be bothered by a little more. He could have delegated this too. Could have let Antonio handle it and maintained the clean hands he tried to present to Isabella. But some things required personal attention. Sofia Torino, stripped of her Julia persona, looked smaller somehow. Less beautiful. Fear had a way of revealing true faces, and hers was pinched with terror that no amount of practiced charm could disguise. "Dante, please," she started, and he held up one hand. "I'm not interested in explanations or apologies or manipulations. I'm interested in one thing: why my daughter?" Sophia swallowed hard. She was leveraged. Insurance. "I knew you'd never suspect someone who was kind to your child. I knew it would give me access to everything. You used her loneliness, her grief for her mother, her need for family." Dante's voice was conversational, which made it more terrifying than shouting. "You saw a vulnerable little girl and you weaponized her trust." "It was business," Sophia whispered. "Your father destroyed my family. Took everything we had. This was justice. My father's war with your family ended before you were born. The vendetta you've been nursing is a fairy tale you told yourself to justify spite." Dante leaned closer. "And you made a fundamental miscalculation. You assumed I built an empire because I love power. But I built it to protect one person. And you threatened her. What happened next took less than 5 minutes and would never be spoken of again." When it was over, Sophia Torino was gone, the Torino family's last gasp of revenge extinguished, and Dante had sent a message that would echo through the underworld for years. Threaten a Romano, especially the small one, and there was no alliance strong enough to save you. Antonio disposed of the evidence with the efficiency of long practice. Dante washed his hands, literally and metaphorically, and went home to his daughter. 3 weeks after Dante's return, he called a tribunal, a gathering of the 5 families that controlled the city's underworld. It was an old tradition rarely invoked, reserved for matters that affected everyone. The Romano mansion's great dining room, where Isabella usually had breakfast, was transformed into a court. Dante had considered not telling Isabella about this, considered shielding her from the reality of his world. But that was what had made her vulnerable in the first place. So instead, he sat her down the night before and explained, in age-appropriate terms, what would happen. "Tomorrow, men who work with Pop are going to come to the house. They're going to ask you questions about what you saw, about Julia. You'll tell them the truth, and they'll understand that you were very brave and very right." "Okay." Isabella nodded slowly. "Will they believe me?" "They'll believe you because I believe you. And because we have proof of everything you told me. But your testimony matters to Zorro. It shows everyone that you saw the truth when adults missed it." The tribunal itself was held the next afternoon. The 5 bosses sat at the long table, men whose collective power could bring the city to its knees. Dante had laid out the evidence meticulously: financial records, communications, testimony from Marco and the corrupted associates, surveillance footage. The conspiracy was undeniable. Then Isabella was brought in, wearing the dress she usually saved for special occasions, her hair neatly braided. She looked impossibly small in that room full of dangerous men, but she walked to the chair Dante had placed for her with her back straight and her chin up. Antonio, despite his terrifying appearance, was the one to question her. He crouched down to her level and spoke with surprising gentleness. "Isabella, can you tell us what you saw the night you called your father?" And Isabella did. In clear, simple language she described watching through the door. Described the wrongness she'd felt. Described her fear and her decision to call for help. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She just told the truth. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Salvatore Castellano, whose family had allied with Sophia, spoke. "The girl has courage. She saw what trained men missed. She deserves respect." The others nodded. It was agreed. Isabella Romano was under the protection of all 5 families. Anyone who threatened her would face united retribution. It was an unprecedented honor, and Isabella didn't fully understand it, but she understood that these scary men with cold eyes were treating her like someone important. Dante felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest, pride mixed with sorrow. Pride that his daughter had stood before these men and held her ground. Sorrow that she'd had to. After the tribunal, Isabella asked if she could go back to just being a kid now. Dante had picked her up, she was getting too big for this, but he did it anyway, and promised her yes. Yes, she could go back to being a kid. He'd make sure of it. The weeks that followed were focused on reconstruction, both of the empire Sophia had damaged and of Isabella's sense of safety. Dante made changes. Big ones. He promoted trustworthy people to fill the gaps left by betrayal. He implemented new security protocols. He brought transparency to his organization that had never existed before. But more importantly, he restructured his life around his daughter. He set up offices in the mansion so he could work from home. He attended every school function. He had dinner with her every night, no exceptions. He taught her about his world in measured doses, not to frighten her, but to prepare her. Knowledge he'd learned was better protection than ignorance. Isabella started seeing a therapist, a kind woman who specialized in childhood trauma and knew nothing about Dante's real business. In those sessions, she processed her grief over Julia's betrayal, her fear from those hours alone and frightened, her confusion about loving someone who'd been lying. "Does it make me stupid that I liked her?" Isabella asked Dante one night during their bedtime routine. "No, baby. Makes you human. Julia was good at pretending. That's not your fault. But I should have known. I should have seen." "Isabella, look at me." Dante waited until her eyes met his. "You did see. You felt something was wrong and you trusted that feeling even though you wanted to believe she was good. That's not stupid. That's wisdom." She thought about this, then nodded slowly. "Papa? When I grow up, I'm never going to lie to people. Not even nice lies." And Dante had pulled her close, thinking about all the lies he'd told in his life, all the manipulations he'd employed, and wondering if his daughter might be better than him in ways that mattered. The nightmares came less frequently as months passed. Isabella still checked locks compulsively and still got nervous when someone new came to the house. But she laughed more, played more. I started to be 8 years old again most of the time. Dante hired new staff, but this time Isabella had veto power. If she felt uncomfortable with someone, they weren't hired. No questions asked. No arguments. Her instincts had proven more reliable than background checks. 6 months after the tribunal, Dante made a decision that would have been unthinkable before the Sophia incident. He started teaching Isabella about his business. Not the violence, not the criminal aspects, but the strategy, psychology, the ability to read people and situations. They started with simple lessons. Identifying when people were lying. Understanding body language. Recognizing manipulation tactics. Then they graduated to more complex subjects. Loyalty versus fear, earned respect versus demanded obedience, the importance of keeping your word. "Why are you teaching me this?" Isabella asked one afternoon after a particularly intense lesson on identifying trustworthy people. "Because pretending you don't live in my world didn't keep you safe," Dante said honestly. "Understanding it will. You don't have to become what I am, Tesoro. But you need to recognize what I deal with, so you can protect yourself." Isabella had absorbed this with the seriousness she applied to everything now. "Will I have to do what you do when I grow up?" "Only if you want to. I'm building this empire for you, but you don't have to rule it. You can be anything you want, doctor, teacher, artist. The choice is yours." "What if I want to do what you do?" she asked quietly. Dante had frozen, caught between pride and horror. "Then I'll teach you to do it better than I ever did. With more honor. Less violence. But that's years away. For now, you're still my little girl." She'd seemed satisfied with that answer. The truth was, Isabella was showing aptitude for strategy that surprised even Dante. She understood complex social dynamics intuitively. She could predict how people would react to situations with uncanny accuracy. And she had an unflinching ability to see through bullshit that came from having been burned young. Antonio, who'd become something of an unofficial uncle to Isabella, said it best. "That kid's got her father's mind and a moral compass he never had." If she takes over someday, this organization might actually become something respectable. 1 year after Isabella's phone call, Dante held a small ceremony, just family and his closest circle. He stood before these men and women who'd served him for years and made an announcement that shocked them all. A year ago, my daughter saved this organization. She saw a threat I missed, and she had the courage to speak up despite being frightened. She was 8 years old. He paused, letting that sink in. I'm establishing the Isabella Protocol. From now on, anyone in this organization, regardless of rank or age, who sees something wrong is empowered to speak up. And they will be heard. Because hierarchy shouldn't trump truth. It was a radical departure from traditional mafia structure, where hierarchy was everything and questioning superiors could be fatal. But Dante had learned the cost of that rigid structure. It had nearly destroyed everything. Isabella, standing beside her father in her formal dress, felt the weight of being turned into a symbol. But she also felt proud. Her fear, her phone call, her testimony, it had meant something. It had changed something. That evening, after the ceremony, Dante tucked Isabella into bed like he still did most nights. She was 9 now, getting too old for tucking in, but neither of them mentioned it. Papa? Do you think Mama would be proud of me? Dante smiled, thinking of Sophia, the wife he'd loved and lost too young, the woman who'd believed he could be better than his worst instincts. I think she'd be amazed by you, Tesoro. You're brave and honest and kind even after everything. Those were her best qualities. You got them from her. And what did I get from you? My stubbornness. My terrible taste in movies. My inability to cook anything edible. He paused. And maybe my ability to protect the people I love, whatever it takes. Isabella considered this. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Neither. It just is. What matters is why you do it and how far you're willing to go. Your mother would have told me to protect with love, not fear. I'm trying to learn that lesson. You're teaching me. She'd hugged him tight then, and Dante had thought about Sophia Torino, about Marco's exile, about the bodies he'd ordered buried and the lives he'd ruined in his quest for revenge. He'd thought about whether he was redeemable, whether he could be the father Isabella deserved. Then Isabella had whispered, "You're a good papa. You came home when I needed you. That's what matters." And Dante had decided that maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Isabella Romano celebrated her 13th birthday surrounded by bodyguards who tried very hard to look like normal party guests. Her school friends thought they were her father's business associates, which was technically true. Dante watched from the sidelines as his daughter, taller now, starting to show the woman she'd become, laughed with friends and blew out candles. She was doing well. Thriving even. Top of her class academically, captain of the debate team, student council representative. She had friends, hobbies, a carefully guarded normal life that Dante had moved heaven and earth to provide. She still had nightmares sometimes, still checked locks compulsively, still got anxious when he traveled for business. But she was healing. And she was learning. Not just school subjects but the family business. Not because Dante pushed it but because she'd asked. She sat in on negotiations now, always watching, always learning. She had opinions on strategy that Dante found himself respecting. She understood the balance between mercy and strength in a way he was still learning. She's going to be something special, Antonio said, standing beside Dante as they watched the party. Better than any of us. She already is, Dante replied. Later, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Isabella found her father in his study. She was holding a small gift box. You already gave me a present, Dante protested. This is different. She handed him the box. Inside was a phone. Not fancy, not smart. Just a basic cell phone like the one he'd given her years ago. And a note in Isabella's handwriting. For emergencies. Because you came home when I called. I'll always come when you call too. Dante felt something crack in his chest. The last bit of armor he'd kept even from his daughter. He pulled her into a hug, this brave, brilliant girl who'd saved his life by risking hers to tell the truth. I love you, Tesoro. More than empires. More than anything. I know, Papa. I love you too. And in that moment, in his study where Sofia Torino had once tried to destroy them, Dante Romano understood what his wife Sofia had tried to tell him years ago. Real power wasn't built on fear or force. It was built on love fierce enough to protect, trust brave enough to speak truth, and the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter who'd survived betrayal and come out stronger. The empire would continue. The dangers would never fully disappear. But they would face them together, with honesty instead of secrets, with partnership instead of blind protection. Because 5 years ago, a frightened 8-year-old had whispered a warning into a phone. And that whisper had changed everything.
Like and subscribe if you enjoy watching this story. See you on the next one.